Hi guys, so we're going to talk about dissociative disorders and somatic disorders. Dissociative disorders is going to be in class 1, and then class 2 will be about the somatic disorders. So we're going to focus right now on dissociative disorders. In this video we'll talk about an overview of dissociation, and then talk about dissociative amnesia, including amnesia with fugue, and depersonalization, derealization, and then the next video will be about dissociative identity disorder. So just some general things that's important to point out, that we're still dealing with a group of disorders that are very much linked to anxiety and have some significant linkages to the last several chapters. So anxiety, OCD and related disorders, PTSD, and so on. So there's still a lot of what we talked about there that will be relevant here. Dissociative disorders are thought to come from traumatic experiences of some kind. And the somatic disorders have a significant basis in anxiety. That the thought is that they are a reaction to anxiety of some kind. And as you're going to see, they have important roots in psychoanalytic theory that we'll refer to. So the prevalence rate of these disorders is really low, and I need to point that out. It's 0.1%. Right, so that's a very low incident rate, and these are very sexy disorders. People really like to think about them and want to learn more about them, and that's fine, that's great, but it is important to understand these are fairly rare disorders. So as a comparison, schizophrenia has a 1% prevalence rate, and so 0.1 is a significantly low occurring set of disorders. And there's some basic ways to understand the process of dissociation, and therefore to understand any of these disorders. First is that these are a coping mechanism. And that the thought is that in a very psychoanalytic way, they're a defense mechanism, that the person is protecting themselves against consciously experiencing a stressful event of some kind. And so I want you to think about, as we look at these disorders, how these might have developed in an individual in a way that once upon a time helped them to cope. And now they're just kind of taking that coping mechanism and applying it to day-to-day life in a way that no longer is useful, but in this kind of rigid, this worked for me once, I'm going to keep using it kind of a way. And then to think about what kinds of events one might need to forget. A lot of these traumatic events, often about prolonged abuse of some kind, or other kinds of sexual abuse, or other kinds of prolonged abuse. So let's just think about what dissociation is first, because it's a really important concept to understand if you're going to understand any of these disorders. If you think back to Psych 111, when we learned about consciousness and the dual processing model, said that we can only pay attention to one thing at a time at any given moment. And therefore we screen that one thing in that we prioritized. Usually it's the most interesting, important, or compelling thing around us. And we screen everything else out. So we have the one thing screened in, and then all the things that get screened out and don't get consciously processed. We know that this happens. This is not theoretical. It has its roots in Freudian theory, but we can use brain imaging now to watch the brain, preferentially allow some things into the frontal lobe and other things not. So we do know that that happens. And dissociation is essentially the process of pushing experience or memory into the unconscious, to essentially relegating some things, at least for a period of time, to that screened out list, and letting something else get screened in. So with amnesia, it's really clear that we're screening out information that we are forgetting, right? That might be available to us later, but for the moment is screened out and outside of our conscious awareness. And in doing so, we can protect ourselves from information that might otherwise disrupt our ability to continue on in some way that it would be just too disruptive. It is important to know that that whole process is not a conscious choice. It's just happening outside the person's awareness. So let's think together about dissociative amnesia. Let's see if we can pull up the criteria for this. So give me 1 second here. There we go. I'm just going to escape out of here for a second and pull up. Bear with me here, guys. I'm just going to pull up. There we go. The dissociative amnesia criteria. And so I just take a look at this. Obviously, you guys can look at this on your own in the DSM database also, but an inability to recall important autobiographical information, cause, right, and that's it. That's the description. And then the rest of this really is about our normal rule outs. So if we come back here for just a sec, right, so this is a loss of memory for a difficult event. This is about explicit memory. If you remember back in Psych 111, the idea of implicit and explicit memory, it relies on your hippocampus. And dissociative amnesia is almost always for explicit memory. And one telltale sign that an amnesia might be dissociative rather than physical, like something resulting from a brain trauma of some kind, a brain injury of some kind, is that somebody with dissociative amnesia often has, and I think we talked about this with factitious disorders earlier in the semester, but they have that labelle indifference, right? That comes up a lot in this chapter. Labelle indifference was kind of the beautiful indifference, right? That they don't seem upset by their lack of memory. If you or I couldn't remember things that others thought we should remember, and that was the result of an injury to our brain, we would be upset and distressed about that. And often that distress is absent here. Most often, this is a very short-term, temporary loss of memory following a difficult event, and then it recovers. There's also the issue of dissociation with fugue, dissociative amnesia with fugue. And here I do want to kind of escape out of here again because I do want to show you some things. You guys have an article, a New Yorker article to read that's in the chapter, the class, and one of them is about Hannah Up. And I just wanted to put a face to Hannah Up. Because Hannah has been missing now for quite a while. It's not the first time that she has disappeared like this, although because of the circumstances of her disappearance this time, there's reason to be extra worried about her because it occurred during a hurricane. But Hannah, if we can find her, hang on one sec, right? So here's her Facebook page. That was the Finding Hannah. And she was, if you can see, an active, vibrant young woman. And hopefully still is. I'm talking about her in the past tense, but she's been missing for quite a while. And Hannah Up has dissociative amnesia with fugue. And the fugue issue is that not only does the person have loss of memory, but they also wander. That they leave where they are, they go someplace else, they may adopt a new identity, all of it without conscious awareness that this is what they're doing. And so do take a look at that article. I think it's a really useful article to read, and take a look at the criteria as well. All right, so the other disorder I want to talk about is the depersonalization, derealization disorder. Again, this has to do with dissociation in the sense that the perception of reality is distorted some. And these are two different, I mean, they're grouped together, but they're two different experiences. Depersonalization has to do with a feeling of distance or unreality of your own experiences, your own thoughts. So your thoughts sound like they're somebody else's thoughts, or feel like there's somebody, and I don't mean this in a hallucination or delusional way, just kind of a distance from them. And derealization is the same kind of experience except for your environment around you. So often people in derealization will say they feel like they're watching things through a foggy window, or that they just feel like they're in a dream of some kind. Depersonalization, people will often have the experience of their hands not feeling the right size, or their teeth not feeling the right size. And it often is an ongoing experience. It happens periodically to the person, especially under times of stress or anxiety, and often it's low level without consequences, but sometimes it can be disruptive, that if this becomes a strong enough experience, the person can have a disruption to their ability to engage and do their work or have conversations with other people. But for some people, it's just it's just a low-level reaction to anxiety. So we can take a quick look. Come back here. Take a quick look again at criteria for the depersonalization and derealization disorder. So, right, the depersonalization is unreality, detachment, being an outside observer with respect to one's thoughts, feelings, sensations, bodies, or actions, whereas derealization is about your surroundings. And again, with a lot of these disorders in this group, we get this fairly subjective, persistent or recurrent experiences without having to count in the way that we're used to having to account. So without saying this has to go on for at least 6 months or twice a week, we don't have that here, so it's fairly subjective. So we're going to leave off there, and the next video picks up talking about dissociative identity disorder.